This is the Cirrus Vision Jet, arguably the world's safest personal jet. And even though it has a built-in parachute and can actually land itself without a pilot, I had to know, can it really keep you safe when it matters most? That's why I'm on a mission to put this aircraft to the test and find out if it lives up to the hype. Because the truth is that the biggest risk might not be the jet, it could be the wrong type of pilot flying it. We've got a lot to talk about. I'm Hoover, and welcome to Hoover's Hangar. In order to accomplish my mission, I need to learn about the aircraft design, what it takes to fly it, the safety features, and what it really costs to own one. But the biggest challenge will be taking it for a flight to see what it can really do. And by the way, the Vision Jet is on my personal aviation bucket list, but I'll tell you more about that journey later. The reason this is so important is because as a former fighter pilot who now flies for the airlines, I've lost too many friends to aviation tragedies. And that's why I've dedicated myself to flying as many aircraft as I can to share what I learn and help you stay safe. By the way, this is Chris, a good friend of mine that used to fly the F-15, one of the greatest fighter jets on the planet, but now he's flying a Vision Jet with cup holders, but we'll talk more about that later. For right now, before we go for a flight, I wanted to know why this jet looks so different than any other jet aircraft that I've seen. Chris, tell me a little bit about, overall, what do you think about the design of this aircraft? I mean, I know it's very distinctive with the single engine and the V-tail, but what are your thoughts on that?
I realize that they took the passenger and the pilot first, because they created an aircraft that is extremely comfortable to fly in, and as the pilot, it's an amazing aircraft to fly. With the automation of Garmin Touch based on the G3000 suite, with safe return, and an aircraft that has as much automation as you can see in today's world, to include auto throttles. It is an airplane designed around the people inside.
Talk to me about some of the features of the aircraft that we can see on the outside of it.
Well, some great capabilities of the aircraft. First off, landing gear, trailing link landing gear. If you have a bad landing, it's going to disguise all of those, so it makes for an extremely easy aircraft to land. The V-tail, obviously, we needed the V-tail because they chose to put the engine up top. Because if you're not too familiar about V-tails, those types of aircraft tend to have, a tendency to Dutch roll. So in the back of the aircraft, the two ventral fins are actually called SAS, Stability Augmentation System, and it's a fully automatic digital system that is refining the flight characteristics of the aircraft, primarily addressing Dutch roll. In addition to it, the aircraft has a yaw damper system that's working through the ruddervators, but those are some of the unique features of the aircraft itself.
So you said ruddervators. Talk to me about that, because that's a term I think most people haven't heard before.
So in a conventional airplane, we've got a vertical stabilizer with a rudder and horizontal stabilizers and an elevator. In a V-tail, we've combined them, so we needed to combine those words.
Yeah.
So in all things aviation, we're making up words,
right.
So we have a ruddervator.
You came, obviously, from the F-15, 2 engines. What are your thoughts, single engine?
Hoover, that's a really, really tough question to ask me, because, with our background flying the Eagle, obviously we had a lot of fun and camaraderie with our fellow fighter pilots of the Air Force, giving the F-16 Fighting Falcon community a hard time for having one engine.
Right.
But when I first got back into general aviation, flying aircraft with one engine, we had a wonderful Cessna 182. But one of the things I was never comfortable doing was flying at night. When we bought our first SR-22 in 2018, I realized I had a second way to land the airplane, and that was CAPS. And if you don't know where it is, it's located on the front of the airplane as opposed to the back in the SRs. Knowing that we have a secondary means to land the aircraft if something bad happens, then I have no problem flying a one-engine airplane.
All right, I have to admit that this really hit home for me, because after flying nothing but twin-engine aircraft my entire career in the Air Force, I've had some of the same concerns that Chris did about flying single-engine aircraft, especially at night. That's why listening to Chris talk about his faith in the Cirrus airframe parachute system was very reassuring. But now that you know more about the design of the aircraft, it's time to find out what it takes to fly it. And it only takes one pilot, right?
It is single pilot certified.
Is there ever a reason you would want a second pilot?
With a Vision Jet that has safe return, if if the pilot is broken, you can just reach up and push the red button and the airplane's going to go land herself. It was designed for a lower time, lower experienced pilot that could safely operate in the environment of above 25,000 feet.
Sure.
You talk to my wife, and I've got lots of pictures. She enjoys the large windows and the visibility, and most importantly, it is extremely comfortable to fly in.
Who is this aircraft really designed for? Like, what type of person is getting an aircraft like this, do you feel like?
First off, you have private flyers who have the ability to afford this aircraft. It gives them the means to a different type of travel. Sure. Essentially, it cuts the travel time down about 50% when you compare it to the 22T. I see a lot more charter operators starting to realize that this is an airplane well suited for business travelers who are typically traveling 2 to 4 individuals, on about a 500 to 700 mile length distance.
Sure.
So it's a good medium range aircraft for commercial operations.
So what about the pilot that's just starting off as a new student pilot? Is this something that you could start off as a student pilot in, or would you recommend them going through more of a traditional course, or a traditional path, like a 172 or something like that, and then on to like an SR20 or a 22, then this?
Do I believe that someone could get into the Vision Jet with 0 time and start to master the skills of flying an airplane? Sure. The challenge, that thing called insurance.
Right.
I don't think we would find an insurance underwriter who would be willing to underwrite this airplane with a student pilot. Because realistically, you probably need about 500 or 600 hours of flight experience before you make the transition.
Okay.
I would start off our clients in our SR20 Generation 7 aircraft because right from the get-go, you're learning how to manage Garmin Touch.
Sure. And then how is it for those pilots that are on that path that have some time in the SR20 to transition to a jet engine versus the turboprop?
I think the transition to the jet engine, because it's got a FADEC, they're like, wait, I twist a knob and I press a button, that's all I have to do to start it?
Yeah.
And well, we do have to reprogram their brain of that hot start in this engine is bad versus a normal occurrence after we have our $100 hamburger. It takes a little bit of time to reprogram the brain that the airplane flies over the ground. But if they've been taught to do their tasks based on time, not distance, they make the transition actually very, very efficiently.
By the way, I thought Chris made a really good point here, and something I haven't told you yet is that Chris isn't just any instructor pilot. He's flown the F-15 and the F-18, and he's the only pilot I personally know who graduated from both the Air Force Weapons School and the Navy's Top Gun program. Plus, now he's an airline captain flying the A321, and he helps run a Cirrus training center, so I knew he would be the perfect guy to help me learn about the Vision Jet. That being said, when it comes to our mission objectives, ideally you'd have at least 500 hours of flight time in something like an SR20 Gen 7 or maybe an SR22 before making the transition to get your type rating in the Vision Jet. But before you think about doing that, it's important to understand the aircraft capabilities. What sort of useful load does the aircraft have?
So the airplane officially is certified for 7 seats.
Okay.
2 of them are limited at 90 pounds. So they're really for children.
Okay.
A lot of owners actually take those seats out to get a little bit more useful load by getting rid of the weight. The cool thing about the cabin is only the pilot and co-pilot seat are fixed seats. Everything else is configurable and can be moved.
Okay.
So it's a very useful cabin. And you'll actually find that the seats designed for humans have a ton of legroom.
Okay.
So when I do my F-15, I'm getting ready to go cross country, flight planning, I normally think that I can lift about 700 to 800 pounds and I can go 600 to 700 miles. So about 2 hours with a pilot and 4 passengers on board.
Okay.
Right, and that's assuming obviously IFR reserves, with an alternate that's about 10 to 15 minutes away from your destination.
And cabin is pressurized, right?
It is.
Okay. And how's the comfort level for the passengers? Do you feel like?
It's amazing. At 31,000 feet, the cabin stops. The cabin altitude will be 8,000 feet. It's a fully automated cabin pressurization system, just like our Airbuses that we fly at work. So it knows landing elevation from the FMS data, so it calculates the nominal descent rate to make it very comfortable.
Okay.
There's been very few times when I've been descending the airplane that I actually felt the cabin changing in the ears. But it's extremely comfortable.
And what sort of speeds are you cruising at?
At 31,000, 30,000 feet, if we get up there, we're typically cruising somewhere around 0.47 to 0.51 Mach, about 285 to 305 knots true airspeed.
And is that a typical altitude, like in the low 30s, or what do you typically?
The service ceiling.
What's the ideal?
The service ceiling of the airplane is 31,000 feet,
Okay.
and it's ideal if my flight is an hour and a half or longer. I'm going up to 30, 31 or 30, depending upon which direction I'm going.
Well, and what's your fuel burn like at that altitude and at cruise?
In the high 50s to low 60s at cruise.
Okay.
And obviously, if we're lower, the fuel burn gets, I've seen as high as 95 gallons per hour. But that was down, cruising VFR in the airplane, and it's always weird to me going, I'm flying a jet VFR. So, but I normally plan 75 gallons per hour when I do rough mental math before I jump into ForeFlight to do the hardcore flight planning.
In the F-15, you're used to, full afterburner on takeoff, right? What's the takeoff performance in this like?
There's really two different aircraft in the Vision Jet family. The Generation 1 and the early Generation 2s, they had some challenges with the old high, hot, humid. So when we're dealing with very, very high density altitudes, their takeoff performance would struggle.
Limited, yeah, okay.
The Generation 2, they then had what's called the 2 Plus, which is an enhancement to the FJ33A power plant. And basically, when we're in that high, hot, humid situation, the engine produces more thrust. So what I'm typically seeing is somewhere around a 22 to 2,700 foot takeoff roll.
Okay.
So Cirrus advocates that most of their pilots should look for about 5,000 feet of runway length. Me personally, I operate routinely out of airports that have 4,000 foot runways, just because that's where our clients, our owners want to go fly, and don't have a problem getting in and out of it.
And what's the stopping distance like?
It stops great. So we're looking somewhere around a 15 to 2,000 foot stopping distance, and that's 50 foot clearance.
And takeoff, what's the climb rate and the climb performance like?
So the initial climb rate, we typically see somewhere 1,800 to 2,500 foot per minute. What I've found over the last 200 hours of flying the airplane is I average right at about 1,000 foot per minute from sea level to 31,000 feet.
Do you feel like it can really replace the turboprop, type of aircraft that would do something similar? Is this a better option than that?
Okay, before I let Chris answer that question, the reason why I asked him that was because I recently saw a YouTube video with Steve Okniewo flying a TBM 940, and it made me wonder how some of the popular turboprop aircraft compare to the Vision Jet.
I believe every aircraft has a mission that it's designed for. A lot of our turboprop aircraft, they have the ability to get into very, very short runways.
Right.
So I don't see the Vision Jet actually replacing turboprops. I see the two of them being complementary of one another, because again, each airplane has what I like to think of as a sweet spot for its mission. So there's places where the turboprop, has applicability, but when we look at what the Vision Jet will do, she's an amazing aircraft, and she does it extremely well.
Okay. And how does it deal with weather?
Well, the first thing with weather is the Garmin Touch avionics suite.
Okay.
On the MFD, I will normally have my XM radio, all right, with NexRad, and I've got the big picture. And as we all know, that's usually a few minutes delayed. The airplane has 2 different radars up in the nose available.
Okay.
And the cool thing about the Garmin Touch Suite is you can split the PFD and the MFD into 4 different windows. So you'll typically see my MFD as the big map with traffic and the God's eye view of weather.
Right.
Well, on the split of my PFD, I've got the airborne radar, which is obviously allowing me to see real time where precipitation is.
Yeah, so the big thing I think that people might not know is it does have a weather radar.
It does.
So you get that real-time data. What about icing? Can it handle icing?
So the airplane is fully icing certified.
Okay.
They use 3 different methods to control icing. The first one is up at the top. So the silver on the intake looks really cool, but it does serve a purpose. So they use bleed air to heat the inlet.
Okay.
All right, so to protect the face of the engine from ice. The leading edges of the critical surfaces, the wings and the renovators, we use bleed air for boots. Obviously, electrics to heat the AOA probe and the pitot booms. And then last but not least, if we have icing going up on the windscreen, they actually use TKS, just like the fluid we use on the FICI certified SRs.
Sure.
So we use a weeping nose. That's what that little black bullet is on the nose. It throws a little bit of de-ice fluid that migrates over the windscreen to keep ice off the windscreen.
All right, so the Vision Jet is basically more capable than an F-15 when it comes to dealing with icing and weather, but the downside is you don't get to go supersonic or pull 9Gs. Honestly though, it's got some amazing capabilities that make it essentially just as advanced as any modern airliner, but all of that comes at a price.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that pilots make when purchasing an aircraft like this?
They don't buy an airplane that meets their specific needs. And my recommendation to my clients is add up how much weight, how far you want to go, how quickly you want to get there, 75% of your travel. Buy the airplane that fits that.
Right.
Because what's going to happen is the few times a year where you need to go farther or carry more weight, then you just carry less fuel and you just do a fuel stop.
Sure.
You know, we have a lot of clients that ask us about buying the PC-12.
Right.
And I will ask them, how many people are going to be flying with you? 2. I'm like, okay. You know, or, you know,
they just want they have a lot of baggage.
Yeah, they want to lift a lot of weight. Or it's, my best friend has a Phenom 300, so I'm getting the Phenom 300.
They have money.
They do. But, you know, it's fighting the shiny jet syndrome or the shiny airplane syndrome.
And what's the cost for an aircraft like this?
I would actually refer everyone to their local regional sales directors, RSDs, we call them in the Cirrus family. I think if you were buying a new airplane, it's in the mid 3s to high 3s, so $3.5 to $3.8 million, depending upon how the aircraft was configured. I've seen them on controller for Gen 2 pluses in the mid 2s, so about $2.5 million, and I would budget about $200,000 a year for insurance, hangar, and jet stream, which is the maintenance program that covers everything, and they make it so easy.
You mentioned something about Cirrus with some sort of agreement with the maintenance, so tell me a little bit about that.
Cirrus has a program called Jetstream, and you buy a block of hours, and essentially those hours cover preventative maintenance, unplanned maintenance, the engine program, all of your databases, to include not only nav databases, but also access to XM radio and XM weather. So they make it very, very easy. About $650 an hour is, for a new airplane, is an expected cost on Jetstream. As the airplane ages, the cost of Jetstream goes up.
Now, the block hour program that you mentioned that Cirrus has with the maintenance and stuff like that, does that include engine replacement?
It does.
Okay. And what about insurance and hangar costs? What can people typically expect to pay? I know it's going to vary based, especially with insurance.
Yeah, obviously, well, hangar costs.
They don't give you that for free?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, I don't get it here free at PRP because I know the guy who's paying the mortgage on the building. But here in North Central Florida, we're seeing an aircraft the size of the Vision Jet about $2,500 a month for hangar. Okay. When it comes to insurance, obviously it's I've seen $35,000 to $70,000 annual premiums based on the pilot's experience. Okay. I have other clients who have other types of aircraft, and I've seen six-figure premiums. So when it comes to insuring the Vision Jet, I personally believe that the insurance industry, they have fully embraced the safety characteristics of this aircraft, and that's being factored into the premiums that are being offered. What really sold me on Cirrus and the Cirrus airframe parachute system, because at the time, you know, with 25 plus years of professional flying, heck, it was probably close to 30 at that point. I'm like, I lose an engine in my 182. I'm comfortable gliding to anywhere in the world. Paul asked me a couple of questions. And the first question was, hey, what'd you have on your back for 19 of your 20 years in the Air Force? And I knew where he was going. And I refused to be inelected by my partner. And I refused to say the word parachute. And I go, a rocket seat.
That's right.
I wasn't expecting the next question, and Paul goes, well, what pulls the parachute out of the Cirrus? And I'm like, he's got me. And I'm like, a rocket? It was the third question that was very impactful to me. And the third question was, why can't my family have that? And it dawned on me that day that I was reaching that age where heart attacks, aneurysms just happen. And if Cheryl and I were flying in our 182, and I died, unfortunately, our children and grandchildren would no longer have us. In a Cirrus equipped with caps, all right, it's sad, I'm dead, but my wife is going to survive.
Sure.
So when I think about that experience with Paul, which led us to joining the Cirrus family, with the Vision Jet, when I think about its competitors in the 6 to 7 seat cabin class, both jet and turboprop or a market, for a single pilot, especially a lower time pilot, when I think about safety, this airplane has 3 ways to land itself. Me flying the airplane, pushing the red button in safe return, or caps. So yes, I do believe that the SF50 is the safest single engine, single pilot certified jet aircraft available to general aviation.
Great. Well, can we take a look inside, maybe go for a flight?
Let's go for a flight.
All right.
Before we go for a flight, I mentioned earlier that I've got a list of aircraft I want to fly in, and the Vision Jet has been on that list for a long time. But this isn't about just checking boxes. Each one of these flights is a chance to share my love for aviation and learn something that could save a life one day, maybe even yours. Tell me what aircraft I should add to the list, and I hope you join me on this mission. I might not get to be an astronaut, but someone watching this video might, and you could be the one person that inspires them to start that journey. Now sit back and get ready, because we're about to find out if this really is the world's safest personal jet.
So with the G3000 or the Garmin Touch Suite, we have to initialize the avionics. So we've just finished up the initialization, which basically gets all the important information into the flight management system, which ultimately yields some crazy safety capabilities. First off, the airplane is always calculating takeoff and landing distance for us.
Okay.
So based on the air density and the environmental system, the loading of the aircraft, that's why I asked you your personal weight. We know that our takeoff distance is going to be 2,031 feet. Our distance to clear a 50-foot obstacle is 2,846 feet based on today's environmentals.
Right.
So I love having my checklist here. Again, it's customizable to every pilot. So we've already briefed our safety briefing before we fired up the airplane. And I love that these checklists in the Vision or in Garmin Touch are really well suited to really helping a pilot manage their flow. In a lot of cases, I'm more of a read and do checklist type of individual in the Vision Jet or the Gen 7 than I am in the Gen 6 and earlier aircraft, where I'm more of a flow type of person and use the checklist to verify.
To back you up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or to prepare me.
Yeah, so like I know on the A350, it's going to sense a lot of these things, and they'll automatically turn green.
Nope.
But on this, you're basically just going through and.
Yep. There's a thumb wheel. The wheel moves the cursor. Depressing the wheel checks it off.
Right.
And we advocate taking off with the flight director. So we're getting the flight management system arm for the takeoff. So I've just turned on the flight director to include the auto thrust. We know we're going to be on runway heading, and we're going to command our climb profile. So we affectionately say 2/4 2 little green thingies and 4 little white thingies, I've got the flight management system ready to go.
Sure.
And our normal initial pitch altitude is 10 degrees. Right? We don't have any CAS messages that are going to keep us from flying for Cirrus land. CAS is crew alerting system. For example, our Airbuses, ECAM,
Right.
our F-15 days, well, we were working off of just a good old checklist, and we had the darn, what the heck was that thing on the right-hand side with all the, we had all the annunciators on the right-hand side buried under the
master
glares.
caution panel.
That's it, the master caution panel. Pacific ground, Vision Jet 678 Sierra Foxtrot, taxi from Cirrus with information, Bravo, VFR to the northwest.
And Vision Jet 8 Sierra Foxtrot, Kissimmee, I missed the first part of the call sign. Taxi to runway 24, view taxiways, Charlie Delta Bravo, crossway 15.
All right, taxi to runway 24 via Charlie Delta Bravo, cross runway 15, and the call letters are November 678 Sierra Foxtrot, and if possible, request VFR flight following to Ocala.
All right, 8 Sierra Foxtrot, what else did you want to Ocala?
Vision Jet 8 Sierra Foxtrot, request 8,500.
Roger.
Yeah, it's interesting how the avionics have advanced so much over the years.
Right.
It is.
You've got your moving map in the airport diagram readily available to you. You can see where you're at and see what's going on. I think it just helps out with your overall situational awareness.
At PRP, we actually teach to not use the checklists while moving a Cirrus.
Right.
We want people to keep their eyeballs out to make sure that they don't hit something, runway incursion, or hit someone, probably from bad to worse.
Ground, good afternoon, 172 ground Bravo, off runway 24.
But there's such nice features of knowing where you are, especially at complex airports.
Well, especially for single pilot operations, you really don't want to be heads down, especially like on a ramp like this, trying to read and run your checklist while you're taxiing.
Vision Jet 678 Sierra Foxtrot, squawk 3422, departure will be on 119.4.
3422, departure on 119.4, Vision Jet 80 Foxtrot. The more I fly Garmin Touch, the more I realize that I really love this avionics suite.
Yeah.
It so simplifies the tasks of flying these modern aircraft, especially when you kind of get into your groove managing the GTCs.
Right.
Cirrus has done such an amazing job with the Gen 7. If we look at this is a Gen 7.
Okay.
So Gen 7 pilots are already being prepared to be able to manage this avionics suite and get the most out of this aircraft when they're ready to upgrade.
Sure.
All right. I heard them say that we're clear to cross 15. It is closed, but we're both pilots. You agree with that one?
I agree. Did you ever see yourself when you were flying the Eagle, thinking you would be flying something like this?
When I flew the F-15 as a young guy, I couldn't see myself doing anything other than flying the F-15.
Being a fighter pilot. That's all everybody wants to do, right?
And, I'm not quite sure how it was in your squadrons, but we couldn't say the B word. I know you guys said that in the Strike Eagle all the time. We couldn't say the A word. We couldn't say all sorts of crazy things, which you and I both know raised a lot of money for the Heritage Room.
Sure.
But, I had the privilege of flying fighter aircraft for 19 of my 20 years. 17 in the Eagle, 16 and a half in the Eagle, 2.5 in the Hornet.
Yeah, that's right. You did the Hornet thing with Top Gun, right?
I did. That was awesome. 2.5 years of seeing a different side of aviation.
Sure. Yeah.
But as I made that transition to the airline world, I realized that I loved flying that airliner as much as I loved flying the F-15 because I enjoy flying aircraft.
Right.
General aviation is a lifestyle, and the Cirrus is an enabler to traveling.
Right.
So. Yeah, when I was a baby Eagle driver, I didn't see myself in the Vision Jet or the SR-22.
Yep.
But I love each of them.
Yeah. Yep.
It's funny to hear Chris talk about this because when I was flying the F-15, I never imagined that I'd be flying for the airlines one day, let alone going for a ride in a Vision Jet. But the thing is, it's not about the aircraft. It's about the love for aviation.
All right, this is going to be a normal takeoff off of a runway 24. It's going to be a 2,800-foot takeoff roll on a 6,000-foot runway. If we lose an engine today below 700 feet MSL, we're going to be stopping or landing straight ahead. Above 700 feet, we're going to immediately go to caps. For us to think about gliding the airplane back to the airport, I like to be above about 3,000 feet AGL to do a 180 opposite landing. Otherwise, we always have caps as an option.
November 24 Alpha, base follow traffic off your left wing.
Now, when somebody gets checked out in this aircraft, did they go through a lot of those, engine failure on takeoff?
They do. Cirrus does a great job in their 142 program up in Knoxville, getting your type rating. In fact, I hate to share this with all of our F-15 bros, but they actually teach high key and low key. Okay. We remember hearing that from our F-16 brethren. Yep. And that's part of the training, both in the simulator and in the airplane. Okay. A gentleman lost an engine about a year ago, and he glided into the Toccoa airport, did the spiral, perfect landing.
Nice.
Yeah, didn't have to go to the parachute. So that's a testament to the training that he received with Cirrus. Yeah. So going back to, how I utilize this for safety, once I've gotten my briefs, you start seeing, as I'm turning off the split windows, that means I'm getting closer to take off.
Sure.
And, I love the MFD with all the data that's pumping in, because it's showing me all the things that are going to hurt me. Right. Weather, traffic, terrain. Obviously, with synthetic vision, we have terrain also. Okay. All enhancers, for safety. And this airplane obviously has the capability to do, just like the SR-22, to do standard instrument departures that if we were on some form of a SID, we would have all of that loaded in.
Yeah. Do you feel like this can be sometimes a bit intimidating for new pilots?
Very much so.
Adjusting to it?
There is.
Do you feel like Cirrus does a good job of making them, getting them to a comfort level to where they're ready to go execute single pilot by the time they're done with their training?
They do, and the accident statistics speak volumes to that. Hold on one second. Pacific Tower Vision Jet 6780 Foxtrot number 1 runway 24.
Remember 6780 Foxtrot, Pacific Tower short runway 24.
80 Foxtrot holding short runway 24.
And
it is a testament. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, the first time I got checked out in an SR-22, it was 2018, so I'd been flying, professionally for about 30 years.
Yeah.
And I went through all the Cirrus training, but ultimately, I honestly didn't feel comfortable in my SR-22 until I had taken her cross-country for about 6 months.
Sure.
And still to this day, it's been, 7 years I've been flying Cirruses. I still learn something about these avionics suites every time I fly.
Yeah.
Did you hear what he just said? This is such an important concept to understand. Even though Chris and I have thousands of hours in fighter jets, we're always learning something new on every flight. That's the pilot debrief culture that we grew up in, and it's about staying humble and knowing what your personal limits are.
We think back to our fighter days, it's the mission planning, right? Like we plan these large-scale exercises and things like that, but for somebody flying this aircraft that's new to it, you're planning to your comfort level, right? So you don't have to fly in IFR. You don't have to do things that the aircraft is capable of just because it's capable of it.
Yes, and that's obviously an important facet of the instruction industry of getting people to identify their own personal limitations.
Right. Your personal minimums checklist, essentially.
And when you look at people, coming into the Vision Jet, many times it's the first aircraft that's retractable gear. It is the first aircraft that is pressurized.
Yeah.
It's the first aircraft that'll operate above flight level 250.
Yeah.
When you think about those classes when we were student pilots, in the Air Force, with all the aerospace physiology and going into the altitude chamber, the uniqueness of operating in those environments, I find it very interesting as I see individuals.
678 Sierra Foxtrot, right turn on course, runway 24, clear for takeoff.
Vision Jet 678 Sierra Foxtrot, cleared for takeoff, runway 24, right turn now. Now, we are going to cheat a little bit because there's a TFR just to the northwest of us. We'll avoid that. All right, I see runway 24. Approach path is clear.
East and right traffic for 24. We'll tell you when we're circling.
So as we start applying power, we're going to be looking for, obviously, the pitot-static system working properly. We're going to be making sure that we don't have any CAS messages and that the engine is producing full power, indicated by the blue T.
Okay.
Have to love FADAC controlled engines.
Tower 7 Alpha Bravo, showing a target 700 below ahead. Are you on with him?
All right, there's the airspeed. We're at full power.
Anybody 700?
And we don't have any CAS messages.
700 below me, so they'd be at 1300.
Hey, affirmative, this is Cherokee.
There's 85 knots. Rotating to 10 degrees nose high. No runway left, positive rate, gear coming up.
He's on with me.
Gonna keep my finger on the gear retraction lever
November 33 Charlie,
until the gear are indicated up and safe.
Traffic's gonna be a citation, that's gonna beat you, man.
And 115 on the flap retraction airspeed.
November 8 Sierra Foxtrot, continue runway heading for now.
8 Sierra Foxtrot, runway heading. There's 115, flaps coming up. Actually, we're going to be leveling off. We are underneath the Bravo, so we're going to be having to actually make sure we don't exceed that 200 knot limit.
Right.
That's another thing I find interesting is...
November 8 Sierra Foxtrot, right turn on course, contact Orlando departure.
8 Sierra Foxtrot. You know, getting those new pilots to this aircraft, understanding that we have things like speed limits for below the Bravo.
Well, can you bring up a sectional on here? Or
we can.
Okay.
But, or in this case, we can see the altitudes of the Bravo right there, 4,000 to 10,000.
Okay.
Orlando departure, Vision Jet, 678 Sierra Foxtrot, 1,500.
Lower 678 Sierra Foxtrot, ident, maintain VFR, or actually just resuming our navigation outside the Bravo.
8 Sierra Foxtrot, remain clear of the Bravo with the flash.
Lower 8 Sierra Foxtrot, your contact 3 miles west of Stanford, altitude case 1,500, altitude at your discretion.
Vision Jet, 678 Sierra Foxtrot, altitude our discretion, request into the Bravo.
Lower 8 Sierra Foxtrot, clears in the Bravo, maintain 5,500.
8 Sierra Foxtrot, 5,500 into the Bravo. All right, so in this case, 5,500 feet is selected. Back to FLC.
Lower 8 Sierra Foxtrot, contact approach 120.15, good day.
120.15, 8 Sierra Foxtrot. I love this, you don't have to type the 1 with this avionics suite.
Okay.
Now we are going to do the Florida weave. Since we are VFR, we got to stay clear of these clouds.
Yeah.
It is kind of unique.
1405, commenting 16,000. 16.
Unique flying VFR and jet.
Right.
Orlando departure, good afternoon, Viva 701.
It's like BFM in the clouds.
Yes, it is.
Departure radar contact.
Except you don't have a 4-ship to manage, to throw number 4 through the clouds.
Yeah, but we rarely flew in Class Bravo airspace with a 4-ship of Eagles.
that's true.
You know.
Yeah, that was a ATC nightmare if we did, because you're doing 300 knots too.
Yep.
You know.
Orlando departure, Vision Jet, 678 Sierra Foxtrot, 3,500, climbing 5,500.
678 Sierra Foxtrot departure, thank you. Climb and maintain 9,500.
9,500, 8 Sierra Foxtrot.
You know, actually, it looks like 85 was your request. Did you want to just stop there?
8 Sierra Foxtrot, we would love 8,500, please.
Let's do that. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, there's Disney World right off our right side.
Yeah.
The TFR, you have to love this. The TFR is getting beamed in.
Okay.
4405, cleared right.
And notice, you know, right here I can touch it, and I know that the TFR is surface at 3,000 feet. So based on our track vector, we're over the lateral side, but we're above the TFR. So a great situational awareness on all of these Garmin suite.
Yeah.
As a side note, even though growing up in Central Florida, I had a few chances to go to Disney World, this was the first time I got to see it from the air in a personal jet, so that was pretty cool.
Right heading 270 and can maintain 16,000, 16,000 will be 701.
Now you've got autopilot activated, right?
I've got the autopilot
The yaw damper on.
So left to right, heading
mode.
is our lateral mode.
Yep.
The autopilot and yaw damper engaged. We're in flight level change with, in this case, 135 knots selected. I was basically selecting 135 to increase our climb rate to get above these clouds.
Yeah, I see we're doing about 3,000 feet a minute.
Yep. And really quickly, again, taking advantage of this avionics suite. All I had to do is touch a little button right here on the GTC, I've re-split the window.
Okay.
I am in MCT, maximum continuous thrust. All right, we're making sure that the cabin is pressurizing, altimeter is set, and I'm back to the normal setting of the PFD. And just for illustration, down here on the throttle quadrant, I'm going to select AT for auto throttle.
Okay.
All right, so you notice AT for auto throttle, and we're in the climb mode. So if we were to look at just a regular Cirrus aircraft with Perspective Plus, or touch, we wouldn't have this field on the flight mode annunciator.
One able direct to Ocala.
8 Sir Foxtrot, one able direct to Ocala. Cirrus loves to call this the scoreboard.
Okay.
And you can see a vertical line, white line there, and a vertical white line here. My lateral steering mode, my vertical steering mode, my autopilot mode, it matches up with my autopilot controller. Lateral steering, vertical steering, autopilot mode. Now, with the aircraft that has the auto thrust available to it, I now have my thrust mode. All right, so AT for auto thrust, right, what mode the auto thrust is in. So in this case, we're in speed mode with 240 knots indicated selected. All right, we are cleared into the Bravo, so we no longer have the 200 knot limitation.
Right.
And this is our cruise altitude. So technique, I'm actually going to turn off my auto thrust, and I'm going to back my power off just a little bit.
Do all Vision Jets have auto thrust?
Generation 2 is where the auto thrust was incorporated into the fleet.
Okay.
So Gen 2, the auto thrust. Gen 2 Plus added safe return.
Okay. Do you think the auto thrust makes a big difference from the previous versions? Maybe even flying IFR conditions?
It makes a huge difference, especially for the low time jet pilot.
Okay.
It's something else that we have taken and allowed automation to help them manage everything we do with the aircraft.
Right.
You know, me personally, a lot of times I find that in this aircraft, I'm actually flying with the auto thrust turned off. That's a personal choice.
Sure.
But what I could do with the auto thrust, I could easily manipulate by selecting either the FMS speed, which is indicated by magenta, right, or manual. You notice the manual speed, I'm going to turn auto thrust back on. Manual speed is in blue. Okay. So if ATC told me to maintain 200 knots, I can select 200 knots, and now the aircraft is going to throttle modulate, all right, the engine to maintain 200 knots.
Okay.
So it really helps with the complexity of managing all the tasks that we have to do in these modern aircraft.
How do you guard against an over-reliance on the automation for a new pilot in an aircraft like this that maybe, you know, they start getting a couple hundred hours and they just start to get really comfortable with using the avionics? Do you feel like that's a disadvantage to them?
How do we guard against the over-reliance with automation at our airlines? The Airbus is as automated as Garmin Touch is.
Sure.
And, you know, we've seen professional pilots who turn the autopilot on a couple hundred feet off the ground, and they turn the autopilot 100 feet above decision altitude.
Right.
Right? So we have the same challenge in professional aviation. So we all need to embrace our current proficiency level and challenge ourselves to turn the automation off and hand fly the aircraft. Have pitch and power settings that are going to give you certain, you know, kinetic energy states. So if you had to, you could fly the aircraft without your airspeed indicator.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that Chris is right. Sometimes there's an over-reliance on the automation to keep you safe, and that's why it's so important to stay sharp and practice hand flying every now and then.
Is it easy to hand fly? And how much trim? Do you need a lot of trim? Like, is it?
So you didn't notice it when I raised the gear and raised the flaps.
Right.
As the airplane was accelerating, I was using the trim wheel to throw in a lot of trim. The airplane has manual pitch trim, electric pitch trim.
Okay.
It has electric roll trim.
And 2427, right heading 290, clear direct red.
The airplane is actually very gentle to fly. You notice right now she's nice and trimmed, she's holding altitude, and the bank angle I set, I just did a gentle turn because, you know, Orlando approach told us go direct to Ocala.
Yeah. 678 Sierra Foxtrot, contact Jacksonville approach on 128.67, and you're leaving Bravo airspace.
2867, leaving the Bravo, 8 Sierra Foxtrot. So before I call them really quick, I'm just going to show you how easy it is to set some of this stuff up. Let's go get Ocala ATIS up really quick so we can check in with our ATIS. So I'm just touching the frequency. I'm going to put it in the radio I want. In this case, I want to start listening to it in my number 2 radio. Automatically tuned it. So even hand flying, right, it's very easy to manage the tasks. It's a responsive yet stable aircraft to fly.
As we listened to the ATIS to get the latest weather information, I couldn't help but think about how fortunate I was to get this opportunity to fly in a Vision Jet. And when I think about buying my own aircraft someday, the Vision Jet is definitely at the top of my list, especially when it comes to the safety features that it has. Also, it just feels like you're flying in a modern airliner, and it's awesome how you can manage everything by yourself. That being said, the mission isn't complete because we still need to do some stalls and test out a few more capabilities of the aircraft.
Jacksonville approach, Vision Jet 678 Sierra Foxtrot, 8,500 kilo. We're going to go come over this little lake over here. It's called Lake Weir. Okay. And it's just coming underneath the nose. So we'll get some clearing turns done, and then we'll show you how.
Sierra Foxtrot, what was your request?
And 8 Sierra Foxtrot. We're just going to do some VFR work over Lake Weir and then proceed into Ocala.
Okay, what else are you going to be doing that work at?
6,500 to 8,500, 8 Sierra Foxtrot.
How long do you anticipate?
And Vision Jet 8 Sierra Foxtrot, no more than 10 minutes. So really quick.
He doesn't sound very happy.
Number 04 Alpha Dex Hotel Timber 3013.
So it's asking for me to check the landing field elevation because just like in our modern airliners, the flight management system provides the field elevation, which the pressurization controllers control, the depressurization of the cabin to make it comfortable on the occupant's ears. And it's all coming through the Garmin suite, so you can notice here in magenta 90 feet is the field elevation. And the cabin altitude right now, we're at a whopping 40 feet due to the pressurization capabilities of this aircraft.
Right.
And at max service ceiling of this aircraft at 31,000 feet, the cabin's only at 8,000 feet. It's very comfortable to fly.
Sure.
All right. And one's over there to the right. So quick little clearing turns. Remember, the Garmin 500, 600, 700 autopilots all have electronic stability protection.
Right.
In this case, hand flying, I know ESP is active because of the double tick marks at 45 degrees.
Okay.
And,
Kitty.
you know, ESP is going to protect the aircraft from excessive bank, excessive pitch, excessive high speed, and excessive low speed. And depending upon the series,
that area right there.
and Vision Jet 8 Sierra Foxtrot Affirm.
Okay, just make sure you said 8,500 to 6,500, correct?
Vision Jet 8 Sierra Foxtrot Affirm, 65 to 85, and it'll be about present position to about 2 miles northwest.
No higher than 85 for traffic, but if you could start down to 8 for right now, I do have traffic southwestbound at 8,500, just north, yeah.
All right, 8 Sierra Foxtrot, we'll keep it 8,000 to 6,500.
9 for Romeo traffic, 12 o'clock, 3 miles west.
All right, so we'll go down to 8,000. We'll go down to 8,000 feet, and maybe set up for some steep turns and some stalling of the aircraft.
Yeah.
All right.
That looks good. I'm just looking out this traffic out here. I got this one guy up here, but
I don't see him.
oh, this guy's high. But there's somebody else out there. I'm looking for him too, but
Yeah, he's right underneath them.
yeah.
A couple hundred feet above us. The nice thing is notice over here on the traffic map, the little green line is the relative motion between our two aircraft. So the green line is passing behind us, so even though he's only 200 feet above us, because of the speed of our aircraft and our current heading,
Yeah.
I know that he's not going to hit me.
Okay.
And you think about when we did intercepts in the F-15, you know, we always were looking at things like heading.
Yeah.
But this takes the heading of the two aircraft and it actually does the math for us.
Aspect angle.
Yep. All right. We'll go steep turn to the right. And right now, notice as soon as I hit 45 degrees, that's the airplane rolling herself back to 30.
Okay.
So if I don't do anything, if I've just got distracted, it's going to roll me back and going to keep us from potentially having the nose getting buried.
Altitude.
Right. Now I can override it just by holding the stick and pushing against.
Forcing it, yeah.
Yep. And you can, I don't know if you can see my arm right now.
Yeah.
It's a lot of force.
Okay.
Right. Now as I'm holding it,
engaging autopilot.
The airplane said for 50% of the last 40 seconds, all right, a parameter for ESP was exceeded.
Sure.
So it's automatically engaging the autopilot in level mode.
Right.
Going, dude.
Yeah.
Why are you trying to fly in a flight, you know, envelope that you shouldn't be, you know, necessarily doing?
Yeah, that's your spatial disorientation saver.
Oh yeah. And now in this case, I've actually temporarily disabled, right, ESP, and you can see that the airplane just very stable, right? Yaw damper's turned off, so I'm actually having to step on a tiny bit of right rudder for coordinated flight with the rotavators.
Sure. So what's our fuel burn rate right now?
Right now we're looking at, well, we were doing about 80 gallons an hour. I really wasn't paying attention.
Yeah. We've got a little bit higher power setting, right, for the maneuvering?
Yeah, but
what's your average fuel burn rate?
Typically at cruise altitude, somewhere around 60 to 65 gallons per hour.
Okay.
And it's going to give you about, you know, depending upon the weight of the airplane, it's going to give us about 315 knots true airspeed, or 305 knots true airspeed.
Okay.
All right, so going to configure the airplane really quick. Going to show you some of the cues that we get for low speed situation.
Okay.
And pretend that we're on an extended final. Or I was on downwind, I just got distracted, I left my power back.
Right.
Alright, so one thing, alright, the AOA gauge.
Okay.
Alright, so it's showing us units. Right, we are getting, this little tick mark is showing us where we're starting to stall. And now the airplane got the stick shaker, and then the conventional stall recovery. Full power, get rid of a little bit of flaps.
Altitude.
The engine kicks back in, and if we just don't touch the eyebrows, we're not going to stall again.
Okay.
Positive rate, gear coming up.
Does the AOA indicator that you have on here, is that
Altitude.
unique to the Vision Jet, or is it a Garmin thing?
It's a Garmin feature. We've got it in all of the SR aircraft.
Okay.
Jack's approach 372
So,
Lima, 7,300.
you know, lots of you know, cues to keep us safe from AOA gauge.
Right.
All right. Slow speed protections, and then obviously getting the stick shaker, which is also a feature in the Gen 7 aircraft.
Sure.
Now, for fun, we're gonna get our autopilot.
What's the number one concern you think for new pilots transitioning to this aircraft? What's the thing they should be most worried about, I guess, in terms of keeping safe?
Knowing their personal limits of going from about 2.5 miles a minute to 5 miles a minute. So many pilots are taught to plan their descent a distance from the airport as opposed to a time from landing.
Okay.
You know, you and I both know it takes us a good 10 to 15 minutes to review the weather and know what runway, you know, they're landing at, and getting everything programmed. It can't be a function of distance, it has to be a function of time.
Sure.
So, you know, one of the things I see as when I do mentor, you know, pilot work in this aircraft is just getting your brain wrapped around the speed the airplane's going over the ground. Secondly, getting distracted with the complexities of not only standard instrument departures, but also standard terminal arrivals.
Right.
So, as we are talking, I was demonstrating we're getting distracted.
Right.
You notice that the autopilot's engaged. It's still holding heading and altitude, but we are starting to get towards underspeed protection. So as we start getting into the stall buffet, or the stick shaker, USB, underspeed protection is active. The airplane has temporarily ceased heading hold and altitude hold.
Okay.
And it's keeping us just above, VS, and all I have to really do is add some power to start increasing, the kinetic energy of the aircraft. And notice the airplane is climbing out. It's holding us right there at about the yellow.
Okay.
Airspeed.
And when we get back to our altitude, then remember white is armed in Garmin.
Yep.
All of a sudden those things are going to go to green.
Airspeed.
And it will resume what we had selected in the autopilot. But another feature, because you think of so many general aviation pilots, I believe that the number one killer of not GA pilots, but all pilots, is distraction. Something distracts them from flying the aircraft.
Right.
And they lose track of their kinetic energy, and that leads to the typical stall spin.
Yeah.
And it's not a GA thing, because you and I saw it in the military. We've seen it in commercial aviation, and we see it in general aviation.
Right.
It's that part of managing all the tasks. And when you look at what Garmin has available to us with the protections, with the flight envelope protections that the Garmin autopilots have, which is equivalent to what you have in the A350, I have in the A320, 321. It's another aid that helps inexperienced pilots be able to manage the complexity of this type of flying.
Sure.
When you think about they're coming into Class Bravo airports on standard terminal arrivals with altitude and airspeeds.
Well, and that's the thing, like you said earlier, pilots that are transitioning to this, some of them they're not coming from an SR-20 or 22, right? They're maybe coming from a Cessna.
Yep.
And jumping straight to this. So maybe they're flying in Class Bravo airspace for the first time, perhaps.
Yep.
They're getting themselves a lot of capability, and the aircraft has the ability to help you out, but it's learning how to manage it and stay ahead of the aircraft, like you said.
Very much so.
That's the biggest challenge.
Yep.
I think. Now we talked earlier about some of the safety features for the passenger to give them that comfort level, and you've got the emergency return.
389, clear it.
So yeah, safe return.
Right, safe return.
Yep.
So essentially, they hit that button, and then everything takes over, right?
So the airplane, when you press the button, first off, it's going to give you a little timer going on. Hey, are you sure you want to do this?
Okay.
And then what ends up happening? The screens change.
RVA Bravo.
And they really become a checklist for a non-pilot sitting in the right-hand seat.
Okay.
And the aircraft, using, for lack of better words, AI, is going to go find the most suitable aircraft or airport. It's going to communicate it to air traffic control. It's going to load the appropriate instrument approach procedure and fly it.
Right.
It's going to configure the airplane and land, and it's going to stop straight ahead on the runway.
Yeah.
And once you land, the screens change, and they teach you how to shut down the airplane and release the brakes.
I want to pause for a second here because this is probably one of the most important features on this aircraft. Regardless of who you're flying with, it's the peace of mind knowing that if something happens to you, that person could hit a button and the jet's going to bring them home. Not only that, but if you lose an engine and you don't have any other options, you've got a parachute to help save you. That's some really cool stuff, but be sure to stick around for my full debrief of the flight later on in the video.
Jax, approach Vision Jet 6780 Foxtrot 3900 request.
November 80 Foxtrot, say request.
Vision Jet 80 Foxtrot, request the RNAV 18 from SAMU for full stop, please.
You can have vectors to final. I got other traffic going to Salmon that's IFR. Turn left heading 340.
34080 Foxtrot.
All right. So, going to, in the interest of time right now, just going to get the procedure loaded in there.
Okay.
No, you can say.
Normally we would have loaded it, briefed it.
Right.
But as we're
flying VFR, I mean, yeah.
So in this case, he's giving us vectors to final, so we are going to activate vectors to final.
Okay.
Beautiful things are, it keeps, right, shows me my next altitude.
Okay. So guys don't really need to fly with a 4-flight iPad.
No.
You know, when they're doing this, right?
Yeah. In all of my Cirruses, my iPad is my backup to the backup.
Yeah.
Because this one could back up that one, for example.
Okay.
And my backup to my backup to my backup is my 4-flight on my phone.
Okay.
But as you can see, when I start splitting the windows,
right, you've got
I got my instrument approach procedure right here.
Approach, November 567 Delta Delta, requesting 2,100 descent for the approach.
And then if we were in weather,
567 Delta Delta, unable, maintain.
The airplane would look like this.
3007 Delta Delta.
Get the tilt set.
Okay.
So I'd have XM weather.
Yep.
I've got real-time weather.
Yep. So now you can ask ATC to deviate if you need to.
Yep. And this airplane doesn't have the latest and greatest, but the new Gen 2 Pluses are getting delivered with the new GWXR 2000, I think it is.
Yeah.
It's a fully automated system. You don't have to worry about tilt, manual, it does it all for you.
I mean, this is really like, it's global SA. This is what this is.
It is.
You've got everything you need right where you need it. But again, it goes back to the training to learn to manage it all.
Correct.
Right.
And you can see how easy it is to come find a freak.
November 6087 Foxtrot Jackson approach, up 3015, advise Yankee for Gainesville.
2015, and come back on the advisor.
All right, now that Jax has got everything under control, I'm going to go back to flying standard airspeeds.
Okay.
So for the lower time pilot,
yeah,
they would be flying the airplane with the auto thrust on, using speeds that are programmed in the flight management system.
So when you activate the approach, those speeds come out of, just like in the Airbus or whatever, it's an FMS program speed from the approaches?
It's not from the approaches, it's actually programmed. Each individual pilot can set their profile. So in this case,
if you had certain speed restrictions on the approach, would it automatically recognize that?
You can load the speeds.
November 8 Sierra Foxtrot, turn left heading 270.
270, 80 Foxtrot.
You can load the speeds into the flight management system.
November 567 Delta Delta, maintain 2000.
Right there.
Maintain 2000.
You can put the speed constraint in there.
So but you'd have to put it in if you saw it on the chart.
Correct.
Or you're going to have to manually input it. Okay.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Either looking right there, looking right here. I know my next altitude.
Yeah.
All right, getting up ahead of my airplane. I've got my tower freak up.
Yeah, you know, I've seen people and some of the videos I've covered on my other channel trying to fly an approach, and maybe they have all these tools, but they haven't learned some of the final steps of the avionics, and now they're overshooting final because it didn't turn to intercept or do what it was supposed to.
November 6780 Foxtrot, 4 miles from Luggy, turn left heading 210, maintain 2000, so established, put RNAV 18 approach.
Vision Jet 80 Foxtrot, 210, 2000, cleared the approach.
All right.
Rear check 465.
So APR,
you're arming the approach.
So I'm arming lateral and vertical steering.
Okay.
All right. As soon as I start seeing vertical guidance, I'm going to start configuring, and what you're going to really realize is that the configuration
November 6780 Foxtrot, contact Ocala Tower.
80 Foxtrot.
And simulating, I don't know the freak, I just come down here, put ground in my standby. And we've got vertical guidance, vertical speed.
Okay. Can we go back full screen on this too?
Yep. And hold on for 1 second.
Yeah.
All right, so we just grabbed the vertical guidance. We're going to set our go-around altitude to 2,000 feet.
Okay.
Ocala Tower, Vision Jet 6780 Foxtrot, RNAV 18 full stop.
6780 Foxtrot, Delta, roger. Runway 18, you clear to land.
Vision Jet 6780 Foxtrot, clear to land, runway 18.
So, yeah, kind of tight vectors. So
Right.
configured a little bit late, because normally one dot below will go flaps 50. I'm sorry, vertical movement, flaps 50, one dot below. We'll end up getting the gear down. And then when we're on glide path, flaps 100, obviously we got a little bit of an intercept from above.
Yeah.
So you notice each time the flight management system was selecting the airspeed, all right, which is commanding the auto thrust based on flap setting.
Okay.
Now we've got the vertical guidance captured, so we'll reset our missed approach altitude. 1, 2, 3 flaps, clear to land, landing checklist is complete. So for demonstration, just showing how the airplane, she flies herself, it's fully certified, right, to fly this, the autopilot can fly all the way down to the decision altitude or the MDA,
Okay.
to include a missed approach procedure.
Okay.
So we could, if you had to, you just push the takeoff, go around button,
Right.
and the airplane goes, yeah, it's time to go missed. We can keep the autopilot engaged, right?
Sure.
And
this is your synthetic vision here, right?
that is synthetic vision.
Okay. Yeah, so even if we had a bunch of weather out in front of us, we're still going to get a depiction of
Where the terrain
where
is.
the terrain is. and
Yep.
everything.
And obviously we can also see it's color coded. So these obstacles, right, are now slightly below us.
Okay.
This big red one right there is above us.
Okay.
And it would also display it up front.
Okay.
And the airplane, currently it's commanding 95 knots. The little
Right.
green circle knows, all right, the actual 1.3 VSO for the aircraft.
Okay.
Right, so VREF. So in this case, I'm going to hand fly. Autopilot's coming off.
Yeah.
Got the flight director on. All right, it's time for our debrief. And overall, the flight was awesome, and I really enjoyed learning from Chris. Now, I'd love to buy a Vision Jet. Unfortunately, it's just a little bit out of my price range, but maybe Cirrus will sponsor me and give me one to fly. Who knows? That being said, if you can afford it and safety is a priority for you, then I would definitely consider it if most of your trips are about 800 miles or less, and you have a family of 5 or smaller, or maybe if you just want something for business travel for 4 adults, especially if you want to travel in comfort. Overall, this might be the world's safest personal jet, but it's pretty expensive, so that makes me wonder what is the safest single-engine propeller aircraft that anyone can fly?
Here we are, just inside a mile.
Yeah.
So, getting rid of a little bit of airspeed to be close to being on VREF.
Minimums.
Yeah, Chris, you're a pro at all this, man. But I tell you that I think the deadly truth about this aircraft is, like we've talked about, it's staying ahead of everything like you've done and having the experience to manage it. And if you can't, set your personal minimums.
Yes.
To your comfort level, and go fly with a safety pilot. Go get some more training if you need it.
So one neat thing, watch this, Hoover. As I go idle,
Yeah.
because of the attitude of the engine,
Okay.
it's almost like it wants to naturally flare for us.
Okay.
Combine that with trailing link
Yeah.
gear,
Yeah.
it makes just for a very easy airplane to land.
Hey, thank you so much.
You're welcome,
for
Hoover.
the flight. This has been awesome. This is a great aircraft.
It really is.
Yeah.
This mission might be over, but don't worry, the next one is going to be even better.
Because you see what they do in the movies, then you realize when you got to try it for the first time without being taught what to do, you have no clue what you're doing. 5-second pitch out. Here we go.